It was a quiet evening in Oxford, like many others. The last day of March 1988, wrote Michael Arris in Oxford Don. Our sons were already in bed and we were reading when the telephone rang. Sue picked up the phone to learn that her mother had suffered a severe stroke. She at once started to pack. I had a premonition that our lives would change forever. Thus, Michael Arris begins his moving introduction to Freedom from Fear, a book dedicated to his wife, Aung San Suu Kyi, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, and the rightful leader of Burma. From her early childhood, he wrote, Sue has been deeply preoccupied with the question of what she might do to help her people. She never forgot she was the daughter of Burma's national hero, Aung San. There was a certain inevitability in the way she, like him, has now become an icon of popular hope and longing. Although she had never been a politician, Aung San Suu Kyi became leader of Burma's democracy movement, placing herself at the forefront of the uprising that enveloped Burma in 1988. Her popularity alarmed the military dictatorship, and in 1989 she was placed under house arrest. The following year, although still a prisoner, she shocked the regime by winning an election that the generals were certain they couldn't lose. Alone in this house for 6 years, with her books and piano and her Buddhist faith, she became a symbol of courage and hope for the Burmese people. In 1991, she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Finally released in July 1995, she is still denied freedom of movement and association. Earlier this year, David Munro and I went to see her, our cameras concealed from the guards who continue to watch her every move.
You and your people are at present up against quite uncompromising and brute power. How can you reclaim the democracy that you won at the ballot box with that power confronting you?
I don't think we're the first people who have had to face an uncompromising and brutal power.
But the question is the most difficult one,
in the quest for freedom and basic human rights. I think we depend chiefly on our own people, on the will of our own people for democracy. We have in Buddhism, we are taught that the four basic ingredients, if you like, for success are, first of all, you must have the will to want it, to want something. And then you must have the right kind of attitude. And then you must have perseverance. And then you must have wisdom. And so you combine these four and you get where you want to get to.
But it still comes down to, on one side, there is a power that has all the guns.
But increasingly, I think it is getting more difficult in this world to resolve problems through military means. It is no longer acceptable. I do not think the ASEAN countries themselves would accept a military solution to the problem in Burma. And the fact that the authorities themselves are so keen on attacking us in their papers seem to indicate that they also are not depending on guns alone.
Could you perhaps first of all describe something that has been rather vivid to me traveling about the country, and that is the courage of people?
I'm really most impressed by the courage of the people who go on working for democracy, especially many people in the NLD, those who have already been in prison and who continued with their work. They know what it is like to be in a Burmese prison, and they know that any day they're liable to be put back there, and yet they do not give up. And that's very encouraging and very inspiring. And I always feel that even if only 5 of such people remain, we'll get democracy. And there's certainly many, many more than 5.
Is it not fair to describe your release from house arrest as an entirely cynical decision by the regime to give itself a kind of human face in order to encourage foreign investment?
There are some people who think that it is the desire for a lot more investments that made them decide to release me. But they may also have calculated that the NLD was such a spent force that releasing me was not going to make any difference to the situation in Burma.
Should foreign investors come?
I do not think they should come yet. And I'm speaking not just for the people of Burma, but for them as well. Now, from the point of view of the people of Burma, the foreign investments that are coming in now are really not helping the people who need it most. We're not getting the right kind of investments yet. There is hardly any investment in infrastructure or in the kind of industry that will provide employment and better standards of living for the people who really need help. And then also from the point of view of the business community itself, of the would-be investors themselves, I think if they study the situation in Burma very carefully, they will find that the structures, the basic structures necessary for sustained economic growth do not yet exist.
Doesn't it also shore up the regime?
Well, the longer it shows up the regime in this form, the more it will go against the interests of the investors, because the structural changes necessary for investments to bring satisfactory returns will not come into effect.
Yes. I hear politicians all around the world starting to justify investment in this country. Before your release, they didn't. Former Prime Minister Hawke has been here and said, I think he said that the regime is clearly deeply committed to the advancement of its people. The other day, another Australian politician, Mr. Fisher, had said that Burma is heading towards democracy, therefore investment is now absolutely justifiable. I mean, what do you say to people like this?
Investment is not justifiable now. But I am convinced that Burma is heading for democracy because of what the people want and because of what all those who want democracy are doing, and not because of the investors investing or for any other reason. So
it's not heading towards democracy because of the investment?
In spite of, let's put it that way. Not because of, but in spite of.
Important point. Yes.
Because there are enough people in Burma who are prepared to work and struggle for democracy. We are heading for democracy in spite of.
I just want to get that clear, because there's a very powerful thought amongst a lot of Western politicians, as expressed by a Foreign Office minister in Britain, where he said that the Burmese people, he said, through commercial contacts with democratic nations such as Britain, the Burmese people will gain experience of democratic principles.
Not in the least bit, because I think if you investigate the situation, you will find that the so-called open market economy that exists at this moment is only open to some and not to everybody.
We've talked about foreign investment, but should tourists stay away?
Well, we do not think that it's a good idea to promote Visit Myanmar 1996, which is not to say that tourists should stay away forever from Burma. After all, Burma will always be here. Yeah. And one day when it's a democratic Burma, I think it will be a place that tourists will enjoy visiting, and they need not have any qualms about visiting it. They need not have any, they do not have any feelings of guilt about visiting it.
I wanted to ask you about that day, the first day that you were placed under house arrest. And
well, there were a lot of us in here, and we were all in very good humor. We were all very cheerful. There wasn't a scurry to burn incriminating material or anything like that, because we didn't have any incriminating material. I think the boys, my two sons were here, and I remember them playing Monopoly with some of the students. They sat and played Monopoly. The older people sat around and talked, and while the phone was still usable, some made phone calls to their families, and then we had to do practical things like arranging lunch for all those people who were caught in here and so on. Everybody was very cheerful and very calm. We all took it very much in our stride. It was not unexpected.
Did you ever, during all those years that you were under house arrest, waver in what appeared to be your steadfast resolve not to accept exile?
No, of course I didn't. There was no question.
It would have been very human for you to have doubts, wouldn't it?
No, there was no question of my doing that. I mean, I couldn't do that. I had promised the people that I would do everything I could to to get democracy. I mean, I don't make many promises. I've never promised them, you know, a paradise on earth, or I've never promised that all the problems would vanish once we get democracy. In fact, I keep reminding them that the problems will not vanish, and there'll be other problems that come with democracy. But I had promised them that I would do my best, and certainly there was no question of going into exile.
What were the most difficult times to you personally during your house arrest?
I mean, there were times when I was worried for my colleagues, and there were times when I worried for our people out there when they seemed to be undergoing a lot of repression. And I worried about my sons very much, because the young one was only 12, and he had to be put into boarding school. So of course, naturally, I worried about these things. Yes. But then I would always remind myself that the families of my colleagues were far worse off, because those of my colleagues who were put in prison in Burma, their families were also insecure. So they would have had to worry about their families as well as coping with prison conditions, whereas I didn't have to worry about my family at all. I knew they were safe.
Yeah. Were you able to stay in touch with Michael during that time?
Not throughout that time. There were times when we were out of touch.
For how long was there?
I think the longest period was for about 2 years and 4 months or 5 months, something like that.
No letters or anything during that time? No letters from the children got through? No. That must have been hard.
It's not as hard as all that. You adjust to everything, you know. You adjust quite quickly to a situation. At least I adjusted very quickly.
You're almost making light of what you had to suffer, because you're understandably comparing it with the suffering of people outside your own house. But there were times, for example, I believe, when you didn't have enough to eat. Is that correct?
Yes, but I don't think of that as a tremendous suffering. I generally don't eat very much anyway.
Suffering.
Yes, but I generally don't eat very much anyway. So it doesn't seem to me something terrible. Yes, it is pretty basic. One does get very weak, and it's inconvenient.
But your health, generally, during that time, it was...
Well, it was not always good.
You worried about your heart and...
Yes, I did too. When I went for some time without proper nourishment, I did worry a bit about my heart, because I had difficulty breathing. So I thought perhaps, well, how shall I put it? Yeah. It was, I couldn't lie flat. I like to sleep flat on my back without a pillow, but I found it difficult to breathe lying flat on my back after I became very weak. But I think that's quite normal. When you're very weak, it helps.
Well, it is normal if you're not eating, yes.
Yes, that's what I mean. It's quite normal if you're not eating well that you should find difficulty breathing flat on your back. So I did worry whether I had damaged my heart in any permanent way, but it does not seem to be the case.
And you were worried about your spine too, spondylosis.
Well, I had spondylosis. That was, I think that's also to do with age and your posture. And I think the fact that I spent so much of my time just reading or sewing, and I think, you know, if you do this all the time, it's bound to affect your spine in some way or the other.
I would try to imagine being you and surrounded by a hostile force, cut off from your family, your colleagues and comrades and friends. Weren't there times when you were actually terrified?
No, because I didn't feel hostile towards them. This is what people don't seem to understand. They say, well, you must have been terrified, but why? I didn't feel hostile towards the guards or the soldiers surrounding me. And I think fear comes out of hostility. And I felt no hostility towards them, so I felt quite relaxed.
It can come out of aloneness and loneliness as well. And you were alone. You just told me that, for instance, you hadn't been able to speak to your husband and sons or write to them, be in contact with them for 2 whole years, 2 straight years. That must have produced an aloneness that in itself is frightening, surely.
Well, I didn't really feel that much alone, because I had a radio.